Everyone. As you were just told, this is the session on South Asian mental health, specifically with regards to survivors of intimate partner violence. My name is Ramya, and I'm a licensed social worker. Currently, I'm working as a clinical oncology social work fellow at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and a domestic violence social worker at a South Asian nonprofit in the DC metro area. So to get an idea of who are all present today and to build some community virtually, if you feel comfortable doing so, please write in the chat how familiar you are with the South Asian community, whether it be personally or professionally, and where in the world you're located right now. I'm currently in Boston and I identify as a South Asian female. And I'll just look at those chats when they come in. But in order to understand how culturally humble and aware care plays a role with South Asians, I believe that it's imperative that we first talk about the basics. So how many South Asian countries are there and what are they? Please feel free to respond in the chat and then take a guess at how many languages are spoken in that area as well. While people take their guesses, I am 5 languages. Okay. So the really interesting part is, for the purpose of this session, there are 8 countries, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Nepal, and the Maldives. But some people don't put Afghanistan in there. And Varuna's actually correct. There are over 1,000 languages spoken. Yeah, Central Asia, exactly. So some people put it in and some people take it out. But so the main language buckets are Indo-Iranian, Dravidian, and Tibeto-Burman languages. Very good guesses here. Okay. As with any community, we as South Asians have cultural core beliefs that have been passed down for generations. Many of which these days are jokes on Netflix specials, right? Or cringy plot lines that are meant to bring out camaraderie. But what ends up happening is at times we lose the seriousness of these beliefs and the acknowledgement of how influential they actually are. For example, South Asian culture is more collectivistic in nature versus Western society, American society, which is more individualistic. By collectivistic, what I mean is that there's an emphasis on family and on gender roles over individual desires. This has often been seen with my clients when they use the word duty or responsibility. And even the need to be a good spouse comes up a lot. As you can also see here, I mentioned the diversity of South Asia. As discussed prior, we are comprised of many different regions and cultures and languages, which also means we have our own religions, festivals, traditions. We are not a monolith, and I think that that's very important to state. While there are similarities, there are many differences. And it's just important to note that domestic violence is very prevalent itself in the US, but it is more prevalent in South Asians. About 40% of South Asians report intimate partner violence, but it's important to note that it is severely underreported in our demographic. Okay. Apart from that, there are the gender roles. There are traditional gender roles and we are escaping them slowly, but it is male-centric. And we do see a lot of powerlessness in relationships, which does lead to different forms of violence. Also, when people get married in certain regions in South Asia, it's seen as going to a new family. And so that family plays a really large role in your life from then on. And then mental health, there's a lot of stigma shame, guilt when it comes to admitting to mental or emotional feelings, issues, just anything in general, or talking about it. And that can also stem from intergenerational trauma, toxic masculinity, just power dynamics as a whole. So just expanding a little bit more on what I said, abuse often occurs by extended family, and this is just due to the fact that family does play a really large role. I think it is a really positive thing and can also be seen as a protective factor when you have a really good relationship with your family. But on the other hand, it can be a risk factor when you are part of this new family who doesn't see you as part of the family. And then the abuse starts from the extended family. And then while the abuse is going on, you're isolated from your own community. It's also really important to note that you can be isolated from your own community by moving. So we have a lot of immigrants that come from their home country. They move after getting married, and they don't have community here. And then they're not allowed to work. They aren't allowed to drive, which means they don't even have a chance of forming a community. And then internal, we have the stigma and the shame that I spoke about before, but also the stigma and shame that's associated with divorce, divorce along with being widowed. Again, the traditional gender norms, and also just the low acceptance of abuse, which stems from the fact that we don't talk about it as much as it probably should be spoken about. And then practical issues are dowry disagreements during the marriage talks and negotiation. Transnational abandonment is actually very prevalent. It's when you get married and then things are going okay or going badly and there's abuse. But then the husband or the wife or just spouse, partner, brings you back to your home country under the guise of attending a wedding or seeing family, and then just leaves you there, takes your passport, just all forms of identification, and just leaves you there in a country that you no longer call home. And then there are language barriers, which really impact mainly immigrants, but also people that have been here for a really long time if they're getting help or seeking help for their parents who, oh, okay, I just got a notification, sorry, who are having feelings of elder abuse, going through elder abuse. And then they may know English and speak English, but it can be less comfortable and harder to build a rapport. And so why don't we talk about it? Why don't we ask for help? Why is it severely underreported? Well, that is due to legislative and systematic disadvantages, immigration, belief that if you call the police, they're going to take your children away. Social taboos, what is my family going to say? Also just cultural and language miscommunication. I see it all of the time when people talk to a victim advocate or someone in the court and they just don't understand what's going on. And at that point, they have to talk about the culture, try to explain in a different language, try to explain the family dynamics before they receive any help. And the help that they do receive is often, well, why don't you just leave? Who cares what your family thinks? And that's just not going to help when there are core beliefs at play that have been there for a really, really long time. And also I want to highlight the bottom, family and children first. There is a lot of fear around losing your family and not being able to get married again, not seeing your children again. And it's a very, very big deal because you get further isolated from even the people that you know, who might be very few and far people to begin with. And then I would like to pose another question here. What types of abuse listed here do you think we see the most of? And do you think that it changed during the pandemic? I'm excited to see these. Okay, so I got financial. Any other guesses? Psychological, emotional from Sadia. Yeah, so we see a lot of psychological and emotional abuse and financial abuse. What we've been seeing more, at least during the pandemic, is actually spiritual abuse and technological abuse, because it became easier to track, to control device use. And you're usually at home with your abuser. You're not going anywhere during the pandemic. So there was a lot of that. And spiritual abuse, a lot of people's protective factors are faith. And when you use their faith against them, it can be really damaging to your soul and just how you're trying to cope, because it's also a coping mechanism. So we saw a lot of spiritual abuse lately. And of course, there's physical and sexual abuse, but it's just not the most common. And I think it is oftentimes noted to be. In fact, a lot of our clients come in and say, I wasn't abused. I mean, I wasn't hit. And they're shocked to find out that actually, what has been happening for years isn't their fault, and it was someone manipulating them. It was someone abusing them. And yeah, Christy, emotional abuse preempts most other abuse. Absolutely. So a part of my work with the South Asian nonprofit, we did a needs assessment, gathering information from people in the DMV area. The age range was 18 to 65. And this is a question I wanted to highlight. So we got the data for, in the past few years, has cost prevented you from receiving mental health services? 33% said yes, and 67% said no. But after interviewing those people that said no, over 50% said that they were afraid of judgment, or that they were taking the survey alongside other family members, more often people who were older than them, and they could see their answers, or they just felt like the stigma and the shame associated. So do you all find that shocking, or would you change your answers if someone else was around? Just a simple yes or no could be there. Yes, exactly. I think what that really highlights is just the power of influence, and my answer would change too. So I found that to be very interesting. So, okay, what can we do? Because we know that domestic violence is prevalent. We know that it's prevalent within South Asians. We know that there's stigma, shame, that we are collectivistic in nature, that there are traditional gender norms at play. We know that immigration is a barrier, language is a barrier at times. Finances are a barrier, but what can we do about it, and how do we approach them? Well, education and awareness is key within our own community, but also beyond. It's what we say when we're talking to people, how we talk about abuse. Most recently, a couple of days ago, I heard someone say South Asians don't experience abuse. They're all very well educated, which plays into the model minority stereotype, which is very harmful because it's a perpetuator of abuse, and it doesn't allow people to actually talk about what they're going through because they feel like they're not going to be believed, and that's a huge issue. So talking about it openly and freely, because it does happen and it's not their fault, is the key, to also understand and expose other people that South Asian culture is not a monolith. Asian culture is broad, and then South Asians within that's very, very broad. And people are allowed to have their own stories. They do have their own stories, and we need to highlight that when we're talking to and trying to help survivors of violence. And then if you're in a direct position, I did see someone saying they're a retired social worker. Coaching with police is very important just because of the fear of authority. Insight into legal rights. Most people are sheltered on purpose and they don't know their rights here. And that's really important. And then knowledge of the South Asian family dynamics. People in this position don't want to have to say their story over and over and over again, and explain to them why family means a lot, and why their in-laws are coming and staying with them, or why there's in-law abuse, why there was a dowry requirement. So I think if we bring those out into the open, it'll be very helpful. So in general, I have found direct communication is key. Listening to people's stories and motivational interviewing techniques are very beneficial. That being said, does anyone have any questions or any stories about how they've dealt with complex situations in the last couple minutes?
Yeah, hi, Ramya. Varuna here. I'm one of the co-chairs, and I believe we follow each other on Instagram. So thank you so much for your important talk. I especially love it when South Asians come together and talk about these topics because we don't talk about it enough. I think that, domestic violence is normalized. And, I've seen many instances where men will slap the woman or will pull her hair or will behave in ways that are a little like untoward. But I also want to talk about like how it's often it's not just the husband, but it's the family that kind of reinforces these behaviors as well, right? Because I don't know if you follow a Bangladeshi creator on TikTok who talks about she had an arranged marriage and her husband slapped her and she left him, and the whole family was like, it was just a slap. Why are you overreacting? And they were so afraid. Apparently the father-in-law had to go beg her and say, please come back. It would be a big problem for us if you leave right now. We can try to make things work. And I think for her, she talks about how her father-in-law and mother-in-law were like justifying and validating this abuse towards her because it was an argument or it was her fault. And that's what I think. I love seeing South Asian women stick up for ourselves, especially in this generation, but in previous generations. And even just thinking about my grandmother, who was pulled out of school to get married to my grandfather. She got married at the age of like 15, and then my mom got married. She was pulled out of college to get married at like 19. And so when you're so young and you're getting married, you often don't think to stick up for yourself because you think it's like normal. And just wanted to share that. I really appreciate your talk.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that I'm not South Asian, but hearing about other cultures is always nice. And this was very informative. I also had no clue. And I think it's always great to like hear about other cultures. So thank you for sharing a part of yourself with us here today.
Thank you. Yeah, and Varuna, I completely agree. Sorry, I was trying to unmute earlier, but we do see also a lot of elder abuse from spouses when they get married to the in-laws, which is not talked about at all. I've seen so many cases that come back, they get really angry at them, like your daughter or son are not acting in the way I want you to, and so then they are getting hurt, which we don't talk about at all. And especially what you said in transnational abandonment too, the in-laws play a case oftentimes. I've had 2 cases that they left them at Pakistan, and the in-laws pretended like they were staying with them, and then 2 weeks later just left back to the US and kicked them out on the street. They were just left there, nothing, absolutely nothing. And with their children, it's frighteningly common. And I just want to bring awareness to that, and it's frighteningly common amongst very well-educated people. I've had clients with spouses who are renowned professors, people that have won insane awards, and beating their wife, beating their children, like with scars and everything, and then saying like, okay, let's go to couples therapy because nothing was wrong, you were a bad wife. That
Yeah.
is a really common thing within our community, is saying like bad husband, bad wife, so this is justified. But
Right.
yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone had any questions. I had one more comment that I love these topics so much, and I love my fellow South Asian women. There's this movie called Tappad, and it's Hindi. If anyone is into like international movies, it's actually really good. It is also the story of a woman who gets slapped by her husband at a party, and everyone, all her friends and family, tell her that it was just a slap, and it's her journey of how she ends up sticking for herself and kind of uncovers her husband's, as a domestic abuse, or creating violence in the situation. So I don't see any questions on my end at Huva, but just wanted to put that out there. But thank you, Ramya. I think that was awesome. I didn't know if you had any other closing remarks.
No, thank you so much. I just want to, we all go through some sort of trauma in our lives, and it's just really important to be there and listen and not assume, because I find myself as a South Asian woman wanting to be there for people, but also assuming sometimes based on identifying similarly, and that is a detriment. So just thank you all for what you do and for being here today. I really appreciate it. Barna did say we follow each other on Instagram. So if anyone has any questions, my Instagram is RAMYASAI28. And I would just absolutely love to communicate further offline. So thank you all so much, and have a great Saturday.
Thanks, Ramya.
Thank you.